And we're back here with Brian Carroll. Brian, thank you for that wonderful message.
Thank you.
So a lot of that stuff seems pretty kind of straightforward, right? Like, oh, we should have empathy for our donors. So one of the first questions that I had was, why don't more organizations focus on empathy or practice empathy? Like, what's stopping them from doing this?
Well, I think a lot of it is we can get, even nonprofits, but we can get sociopathic, which is figuring out how do I get my needs met. And so literally how our brain works is when we're figuring out how do I fund what I'm doing, and if I don't do this, I can't achieve it, what happens to us is our amygdala gets activated. We are in fight or flight, and this causes us to start focusing on meeting our needs. And what we need to do instead is find a way to start regulating ourselves, and this is where empathy allows us to do that, which is we need to get in our cerebral cortex, which is collaboration, helping others, and it doesn't happen to you naturally when you're figuring out, how do I do this? So that's where this is a skill that companies, and it's the people within those have to execute. And for leaders, it's helping your team actually use their empathy to connect and understand more effectively too.
Do you think in the nonprofit space, perhaps, because needs are so great, resources are so few, that maybe it takes like extra effort to try to think about how do I just not worry about my own immediate needs and funding? Because that's one of my theories, is because it's such an empathetic industry in theory, but when it comes to donors, we're very not empathetic. So I wonder if there's like a scale, of...
Yeah, so it's... You're right. The two questions, and I've had an opportunity to work with nonprofits. It seems to be, first question, okay, what's our mission? What's our program? How are we doing what we're doing? And they're solving these huge problems, but always the second question is, how do we fund it?
Yeah, right.
What is it that we can do to fund this? And so, I think the challenges in connecting with our donors is it's this counterintuitive thing that by actually focusing on your donor as part of your community, you're serving whatever it is that you do for your nonprofit, but your donor is also someone else that you need to serve.
Right.
And I think we often forget that.
Yeah.
And it's hard to stay in that place. So what I would say is that what I tried to teach today is giving some hacks, some ideas that I can use to begin putting the empathy skill to action and begin finding ways of getting connected and understanding. And then ultimately, my goal is to have a conversion, but I have to do all this other things that from connection and relationship, conversion flows.
Right.
But if we focus on conversion first, we miss that.
Yeah. No, that's a great point, because often, whether it's NextAfter or like my company or someone, you can send an email to a great landing page, but if you haven't done the relationship building work kind of leading up to it, right, then you could have a great landing page and email and offer and everything.
Yeah.
But, if that motivation side that you talked about, if you don't have that empathy and know what motivates people, then it's going to fall flat.
Yes.
So you mentioned an empathy map. We had a question on Twitter. What is an empathy map, or where can people learn more about it?
What an empathy map, it's a tool that allows you to look at things from another person's point of view. So there's 4 questions. You draw a quadrant like this. And
Love
it's like,
quadrants.
Almost many of the world's problems could be solved just in a 4-box
just
quadrant,
draw
right?
4 boxes,
just 4 boxes, we solve it. So I'm thinking of a lot of them now. So anyway, it's doing 4 things. What is that person seeing? What are they feeling? What are they doing? And what are they hearing? And if I think of my donors right now, what are they seeing? If I think about it, what are they hearing? What are they hearing about me? What are they hearing about the problem? What are they feeling? Like, what is it that is capturing them? Because we give not just because it logically connects, it's because it needs to connect with our heart.
Yeah, totally.
And then doing, which is, if the more we can involve people in our cause, people are more inspired to give when they've actually given their time. Because again, that also connects with our heart too. And what I want to do is, when I have that understanding, there's 2 things I need to come out of that. I understand, the problems that they're dealing with, the questions, the concerns, but also I want to know the joys and what are the things that they want. So that's the empathy map is a way that you as a person can use this for business, for designing something, for creating an email, because it's a way for you to start understanding that other person you're connecting to. Instead of you figuring out what's I want, I actually need to begin to understand that other person to help connect better.
Yeah, and obviously that's a key part of empathy is understanding what motivates and drives the other person. And so you talked about not using our own language, but talking how donors actually talk, using their terms. And so what are some like hacks or tips or like what are some ways that we can learn more about, because you just don't want an organization to do an empathy map and we all just sit around and, because then we're just making assumptions again.
Yes.
So like, how do we bring the donors more into this feedback loop or how do we get them into there?
So many companies and organizations have the answers already in their own walls, which is, if you have people talking on the phone, and some call centers can record conversations, you can even hook in with something called a double jack if you have someone on the phone, and you can listen with them. Actually hearing real world conversations, getting out in the world of your donor, which is like understanding the experience. If you have a customer, you need to look with the intention to understand, not with the intention to sell, but you're trying to understand. Same with listening. When you're listening to those calls, or you can look at your emails, what you're trying to do is you're looking with your empathy to say, not just what's said, but what's the motivation behind what is said.
Right.
So those are just some of the things that you can do. Finally, talk to the people who are talking to your donors, and they can give you a lot of insight and wisdom as to what they're hearing and experiencing.
And what role, if any, does something like social media play into this in terms of like the listening side? Because I think often we approach social media as like, oh, it's another channel to like blast people with. Yeah. But there's conversations happening all the time.
Yeah, and so we haven't even talked about what's outside your walls. This is just inside your walls. So outside your walls, social media is wonderful. I was talking to someone who looked for hashtag and then question marks and was just seeing people there, or figuring out where your tribe or the people you're influencing hang out. So if there's online communities, discussion boards, it's going to give you a lot of insight into what they're saying and doing. But more importantly, I would start with your current donors today and go from the inside out, because a lot of this stuff you're going to hear in social media and read maybe for people who aren't your donors or may not ever be. So that's where you need to have that understanding first.
And how do you go about doing some of this like research on empathy? That was another question.
Yeah.
Like how do you research this? Or
I have spent I don't know how many hundreds of hours reading scientific journals, and here's the thing I would say: if you want to read a scientific journal article, here's the lesson: read the first part and the last part, because that's where the premise and the conclusion is, and then you can decide if you want to read the middle.
Right.
So I spend a lot of time reading and also talking to, interviewing people for a podcast that I host, where I'm curious and I want to learn from others. So I find just networking, talking to other people, and I get so much inspiration from others who are practicing it. And it's most people doing and using empathy don't even realize they are.
Right.
So if I said, give me a good empathy story, people are like, I don't know. So that's where relationship marketing, I wanted to look at the study of language, because our words mean, literally the words we use impact how we think and how we think about us and about the issue. So there's just so much out there in science. The problem is, ironically, scientists aren't great at communicating their own wisdom and their own insights. And so what I'm actually doing is just spending time translating and learning, and then trying to make this accessible to people who aren't scientists, who actually need to do this.
Right. You mentioned like empathy map and some tools. Are there some other like tools, whether they're like official like technology tools or like processes or something like that, for people who want to do more of the empathy side?
So those who were watching the stream earlier might have seen Tim share, and he talked about this journey, this mountain that donors may climb. I think there's I would read and learn about customer journeys, and I've put together a bunch of free tools in my blog. So journey mapping, what that is trying to understand how does someone go through the point of making a decision. What's the journey like, and how are they going through that? And my world was B2B marketing, where you have lots of people involved in a decision. It's a complex sale.
Right.
When you're doing fundraising, you're often dealing with 1 or 2 people, or a smaller number of people that are making that decision.
Yeah.
So that's where I think what we can do is use journey maps to, and you're going to get this information by talking to donors. You're going to find out, like, hey, tell us the story, like what motivated you to give to us?
Yeah.
How did you hear about us? And what motivates you to keep supporting us? Like we really want to understand. And that gives you so much insight and inspiration to begin finding other donors like that. The other thing you can do with your journey map is just look at the emails right now you have in your inbox where people are asking questions.
Yeah.
It's amazing. You have this treasure trove, and so many times those questions that one person's asking could be a reflection of that question that many people are asking.
For sure, yeah.
So that's another effective tool is so you can call it data mining. Some people would say regression analysis, which is a fancy term for saying, hey, let me go through the steps someone went through and try to understand why.
Yeah.
That's all you're doing is breaking that down. So, and I have a lot more, but those are things I would say to start with.
You mentioned your podcast. Mm-hmm. What is the name of the podcast for those who want to?
Yeah, so on iTunes, you can go to the B2B Lead Roundtable podcast. So B2B Lead, search for that, you'll see my name. And I'm interviewing thought leaders in sales and marketing about connecting with people more effectively, and even these ideas around empathy. So it's applicable to connecting with donors or customers.
And the blog, your blog that you mentioned?
So is the B2B Lead Blog. And
nice, consistent messaging
Yeah,
there.
so keep it simple.
Cool. Oh, one other question I wanted to ask. What I liked about the quadrant is what people are thinking, feeling, doing, and hearing.
Yes, yep.
And because oftentimes people use surveys, or they'll, this is what donors say, but then they'll kind of take it as 100% truth. But particularly in philanthropy, what they say and what they do can be very different.
Yes.
So is there a danger of overreacting to what people are saying in the desire to be empathetic, but maybe missing the mark? Or how do you balance those two?
Well, this is where I start with people, begin with who you're already working with and your supporters. If you're a brand new startup, you don't have that. If you're a brand new nonprofit, you don't have that advantage. So this is where you can use your empathy as your intuition to get started, and based on conversations. But I would say there is a difference between what we say and what we do. And so what you're trying to separate is going through what empathy allows me to do is I'm trying to understand, the question is for example, we're at the event. I want to know what motivated someone to attend. It tells you a lot, like what motivated you to give. If you can answer that gives you more understanding about predicting what people will likely do when you talk to more people. Right.
Yeah, I think that's the key, is those conversations lead to insights, and then insights form the basis to do tests to see, well, will they actually do it, right? And if the insight is backed by the tests, we're in. If the insight backs the tests and they don't do it, well, then you got to maybe go back and do some insights again, right? Well, thank you so much for taking some extra time to join us. Thank you so much for your talk on empathy. Really appreciate it. So we're going to move on to another guest here.
Great, thank you.
Hopefully we'll see you again throughout the day here.
Sounds good. I almost took your coffee. So
yeah, hey, you can take it. It's cold. It's very, very cold.
I'll take it for you then. Yeah.
Thanks.
Optimization inside it, baby. Ooh, oh, inside it.